This video does not confirm or diagnose any medical condition. Any references to health are only asserted and discussed in the context of general criticism. Y'all, Hollywood is shaking right now. And it's not because of a divorce, a diss tune, or a leaked DM. Jaguar Wright claims that the business has been covertly shielding a group of A-list males following what she describes as a risky series of private choices. Connected to Teyana Taylor, Jaguar didn't whisper throughout a scary live session. She gave names. She pointed straight to Amon Shumpert, implying he was the first to realize something was badly wrong. Then she added Drake, Chris Brown, Aaron Pierre, and even Kanye West. And shockingly, Leonardo DiCaprio, all apparently bound together by the same secret pattern. This wasn't about romance, according to Jaguar. It was about
fired her ex-husband. She made him the bad guy.
The divorce would have never even been out if he didn't file the motion to use our full and legal name.
Then she had to go and she had to get new energy. What was she calling him? Her apple pies? Have you seen my apple pies?
Did you see my apple pie?
Oh my God, you did a love scene with Leonardo DiCaprio.
How was it shooting those scenes with Leo?
It was
taking a chance, keeping quiet, and who is shielded when things go wrong. She claimed that following specific private incidents, Hollywood went into lockdown mode. Attorneys were called in, NDAs were signed. Publicists rewrote stories, and all of a sudden, people's behavior changed, anxiety increased, relationships ended abruptly and without warning. Fans noticed disappearances, projects were delayed, and emotional breakdowns occurred. In actuality, however, Jaguar claims that it was never intended to make headlines. She claimed that anyone who appeared unstable later on was subtly discredited. They were dangerous because of the truth, not because they were dishonest. It's not a scandal. Music, it's an industry warning. According to Jaguar, what she revealed is only the first fissure in a wall that has been concealing something much larger. Deceived her former spouse. She turned him into the villain. If he hadn't filed a motion to utilize our full and legal names, the divorce would never have been finalized. After that, she had to leave and find fresh vigor. What did she call him? Her pies with apples. My apple pies. Have you seen them? Did you notice my apple pie? Oh my God, you did a love scene with Leonardo DiCaprio. How did it go to film those scenes with Leo? It was only labor. Hollywood has always been better at concealing harm than preventing it. So fasten your seatbelts. What unfolded during Jaguar Wright's live session wasn't chaos. It wasn't rambling. It was intentional. Take your time. The kind of delivery that implies someone is aware of the significance of what they're saying and understands why it was buried for so long. She didn't open with drama. Silently, she opened. The kind of silence that arises when strong people agree not to talk. That silence, in Jaguar's opinion, shielded reputations while letting others fall apart in silence. She claimed that for years. Troubling trend involving Teyana Taylor and a number of well-known men with film and sports. Careers was discussed in private within the business. Jaguar presented it as a tale of danger rather than romance. Decisions made behind closed doorways that held repercussions well beyond feelings. Consequences that, according to her, were never disclosed fully to everyone involved. And after issues appeared, the answer was not transparency. Damage control was the goal. Amon Shumpert, she claimed, was one of the first to notice that something wasn't quite right. Not in a dramatic or public way, but in ways that others close to him later noted. Alterations in conduct, cautious talks, and distance where familiarity once existed. According to Jaguar, that moment signaled the beginning of a pattern, not a single incident. More names came up as her life went on. Aaron Pierre, Kanye West, Drake, and Chris Brown. Every name added weight not because of accusations, but rather because it was implied that these people were linked by a secret thread of controlled silence and undisclosed risk. Then came the name that caused the room's temperature to change. DiCaprio, Leonardo. He was not specifically accused by Jaguar. Music didn't have to. The mere hint of closeness carried enough weight for listeners to comprehend the potential scope of the purported network. According to Jaguar, after private alarms were raised, Hollywood replied, "The only way it knows how." Before talks took place, lawyers were consulted. Publicists shaped narratives before emotions were processed. Non-disclosure agreements turned into barriers, not protections. She stated there were documents, messages, and insider confirmations. Not released, music not public, but carefully stored where only chosen people could access them. She claimed that this information clarified a number of things that people had long wondered about. Music artists and performers retiring from the public eye under the nebulous pretext of personal reasons. Relationships ending abruptly, and projects quietly postponed. According to her, such motivations were never personal. They were strategic. Jaguar talked about Aaron Pierre for a long time, characterizing him as emotionally unprepared for the setting. She claimed music that after some relationships ended, his behavior changed in ways that were beyond the scope of sadness. Confusion, anxiousness, emotional dependence. It's a kind of mental anguish that comes from recognizing you were part of something larger than you knew. This isn't a sign of weakness, she said. It was a warning flag for the industry. Jaguar claims that the industry does not provide clarification when people exhibit outward signs of distress. Following private circumstances like this, it isolates them. Their dependability is subtly doubted. They become a liability due to their emotional state. Not overtly, but through whispered comments that steadily undermine credibility. She asserted that Eamon Shumpert had the same separation. Subtle separation, no scandal, no publicity. Invitations ceased, relationships cooled, and the energy shifted. To the public, it appeared like a regular relationship breakup. According to Jaguar, it was something else entirely. She described a silent architecture geared for containment. Private discussions and well-crafted advice from insiders who never write anything that could be used against them. Coordinating with legal teams are reputation managers. She claimed that accountability was not the aim. It was confinement, panic containment, liability containment, containment of inquiries that nobody wanted to be made aloud. Teyana Taylor, according to Jaguar, was always moving throughout this time. Work schedules packed tight, travel continuous, consecutive public appearances. She asserts that movement produces noise and quiet invites investigation. Music and noise are distracting. Noise shields. Relationships terminated suddenly. Just distance, no explanations, no closure. Whispers vanished as fast as they started to appear online. Blogs were hesitant. Journalists stopped. Tales entered legal review and never emerged. According to Jaguar, access was used as a weapon. You're frozen out if you speak. If you continue, you'll be inundated with attacks on your credibility. She stated colleagues and peripheral figures were quietly told to stay distant. Not because they were guilty, but because proximity itself became dangerous. This, she claimed, had nothing to do with morality or feeling. It has to do with keeping things under control. Throughout her life, Jaguar made one thing clear. Her words were not intended to ruin careers. People were left emotionally shattered while the system continued to run smoothly around them, she claimed, which is why she was speaking. Silence, in her opinion, went beyond strategy and became unethical. She described the scenario as a systemic failure, an industry that regards human consequences as acceptable loss as long as the brand survives. Where trust is surrendered silently so the illusion may remain intact. As her life drew toward its end, Jaguar didn't release threats. She gave cautions. There are more names, more records, and more linkages, she claimed. She hinted that what the public has witnessed thus far is really the outermost layer of a much greater system. Hollywood is not experiencing a gossip issue. It is experiencing a crisis of trust. Furthermore, career-ending secrets are not the most harmful ones. They are the ones that follow people home and reshape their lives in silence. What she uncovered didn't end when the live stream turned off. Because according to Jaguar Wright, the most unnerving portion of the story was never what was uttered out loud. Everyone chose not to question what they already knew. Everyone chose not to question what they already knew. She stated how once the initial worry appeared informally, the industry didn't panic. It worked together. Text messages were superseded by phone calls. Without calendars, meetings took place. Advice was offered orally. It was never documented. This was not about responding to a controversy, she said. It involved carrying out a well-known plan created for situations where power is threatened by disclosure. She said that certain individuals were quietly pushed to take space to adjust their public presence to disappear just long enough for narratives to be changed. The replies were prepared for any questions that came up. Creative burnout, emotional exhaustion, scheduling issues, simplistic explanations for complicated situations. And the people in the middle of it all continued to move. Teyana Taylor never slowed down during the most delicate time, according to Jaguar. Projects overlapped. Appearances remained refined. The picture didn't change. According to Jaguar, movement wasn't ambition. It was a tactic. Inspection is encouraged by stillness. It is overpowered by momentum. She said that others were processing something completely different behind the scenes. She went back to Aaron Pierre, implying that there was more going on than what the general public perceived as shifts in mood or distance. Confusion without context. Uneasiness in the absence of solutions. The kind of emotional stress that results from being instructed to comply without asking questions. According to Jaguar, when persons exhibited discomfort, they weren't confronted with truth. They were controlled. Their reactions were presented as instability, their fears as overreactions. This framing, in her opinion, had a purpose. Once someone is considered unreliable, their words lose potency. She claimed that this covert discrediting frequently occurred through opportunities that abruptly vanished. Missed calls, delayed responses, and subtle professional distancing rather than outright smears. Just enough to isolate, nothing overt enough to pose a threat. She said that Iman Shumpert was surrounded by the same pattern. Just a gradual withdrawal from areas where questions might be addressed to freeline no allegations. No public fallout. To fans, it looked like a recalibration of one's personal life. Jaguar suggested that it was a protective perimeter that was taking shape. This border, in her opinion, went beyond relationships. Quiet warnings were sent to collaborators. Associates are encouraged to keep conversations light. Everyone in close vicinity was considered a controllable variable. She claimed that the names Drake and Chris Brown came to light due to private overlap rather than public occurrences. Jaguar claims that overlap was never intended to come into contact with transparency. She highlighted that individual behavior was not the problem. It was the quiet that ensued. Then there was Kanye West. Jaguar stated that when someone already branded erratic crosses into cases like this, the industry response becomes even more harsh, not to protect the person, but to protect the structure. She claims that unpredictability jeopardizes controlled narratives, which are essential to maintaining one's reputation. This is why certain voices are magnified and others are suppressed, she implied. Why some breakdowns are handled discreetly, while others become a public spectacle. Who can be contained is more important than who is speaking the truth. As she went on, Jaguar turned her attention from people to infrastructure. She described an unspoken hierarchy of crisis response. Legal advisors arrive first, followed by publicists and reputation consultants. Emotional factors don't come into play until narratives have solidified. Engage the discussion if they do so at all. Non-disclosure agreements, in her opinion, are more than just legal instruments. They are psychological ones. They isolate people in addition to silencing them. Once signed, individuals are left alone with experiences they're not allowed to discuss, even with those closest to them, because people internalize when they are unable to communicate. She asserted that this isolation was the most harmful result of all music. They also break when they internalize. Jaguar claimed that even before the general public realized something was wrong, journalists sensed it. Tips showed up. Questions were drafted, but stories stalled. Editors hesitated. Departments of law became involved. She claimed that doors were pushed too forcefully. Access was discreetly exploited and closed indefinitely. Blogs stopped posting. Investigations were closed. Strangely, the internet, which often feeds on chaos, moved on. She remarked that this was not coincidence. It was influence. Fans saw patterns that didn't quite line up as rumors started to circulate on social media. Sudden breakups without explanation. Projects that are perpetually delayed. Public personalities disappearing at times when their careers ought to be at their height. These were not coincidental occurrences, according to Jaguar. They were signs. Signs that a system puts continuity ahead of accountability. She made it plain that this wasn't about villainizing one woman or absolving strong guys. It was about highlighting how rapidly human experiences are downplayed when they pose a danger to lucrative pictures. She claims that other people were told to seek private counseling while being music told to keep quiet. Either overtly or covertly, speaking would be inconvenient, not because it would be incorrect. That silence was framed by her as forceful. As her life progressed, the tone music shifted from revelation to warning. What she disclosed, she claimed, only touched the tip of the iceberg. That the names under discussion were a part of a much wider network. This documentation was found not only in messages but also in dates, behavioral patterns, and abrupt changes that the general public wrote off as coincidental. When quiet becomes the norm, she cautioned, harm multiplies softly. In the end, Jaguar responded to the unavoidable criticism. She said that people would label her as unstable, resentful, and attention-seeking. She explained the label was expected and necessary since when truth comes from someone already discarded, it's simpler to ignore. However, she maintained that the story would not go away if it were ignored. The industry is already feeling the pressure, she said. Internal, not public. There is no longer any trust. Conversations have altered. Now, people are keeping a closer eye on one another. She claims that secret loses some of its potency once it is named. She closed with a comment that felt less like closure and more like an openness. This isn't about ruining careers, she said. It was about facing a culture that views individuals as disposable once they become inconvenient. A society where being honest is frowned upon and remaining silent is praised. She cautioned that more information would come to light because systems based on secrecy inevitably fall apart. Not because she wanted it to. Hollywood, she said, is entering a moment it can't fully control. Furthermore, cancellations or headlines won't cause the worst harm. It will result from the understanding that trust was betrayed long before the truth was revealed to anyone. Furthermore, no amount of image management can restore the status quo once that realization sets in. After the stream finished, the insight persisted. It became comfortable. Once quiet breaks, it doesn't break loudly, according to Jaguar Wright. It quietly seeps through actions, time, and the little choices that all of a sudden became illogical. She proposed that what people were seeing afterwards was recalibration rather than backlash. She explained how the tone of discussions in the industry shifted in the days that followed. The length of meetings decreased. Language became more guarded. Familiar alliances felt strained. Not because anyone had been publicly charged, but rather because everyone knew what it meant to be named in a system that depends on deniability. Jaguar implied that the response was immediate but imperceptible. No declarations, denials, or court documents intended to make headlines. Rather, a tightening of circles, strategic distance, and internal recommendations. This is how authority defends itself, she claims, when disclosure endangers structure rather than image. She returned to the issue of closeness music, how being near a narrative like this may be as terrible as being inside it. She said that some contributors abruptly and silently left projects. Others refused to show up. No one responded to the invitations. It was calculation rather than panic. She presented this as a loyalty stress test. Who doesn't say anything? Who asks questions? Who turns into inconvenient? According to Jaguar, this is where reputations are actually decided. Not on screens or stages, but in private spaces where entry is paid for with money. She suggested that some persons chose safety over truth, while others found themselves unexpectedly isolated for hesitating too long. She made another reference to Teyana Taylor, but this time she did it as a metaphor for how rapidly narratives are safeguarded when profit is involved, rather than as a caricature. She said that the image never shattered because the mechanism around it operated flawlessly. Music, every public gesture was exact, every absence was clarified, and every query was diverted. According to her, this wasn't accidental. It was practiced. According to her, the effects were felt most keenly by those on the periphery. People who couldn't afford to be misinterpreted, those without strong enough teams to protect them. They were perceived as unstable when they paused. They were accused of being unreliable when they withdrew. She went back to Aaron Pierre and implied that what appeared to be a peaceful retreat was actually a means of survival. She claims that it takes ongoing self-editing to survive in a setting where speaking is discouraged. Every phrase turns into a risk analysis. Every quiet moment turns into a calculated move. She characterized this as a gradual depletion rather than a catastrophic collapse of the psyche. Caution takes the place of confidence. Compliance takes the place of curiosity. Jaguar disagreed that this is how force-free systems keep control. You don't silence people directly. Speaking becomes more expensive than remaining silent. She proposed that variations of the same pressure were felt by Iman Shumpert and others. No conflict, no demands, simply an awareness music, that being close to some questions may limit alternatives in the future. Most individuals don't need to be threatened, in her opinion. They only need to witness what happens to those who aren't careful. She expanded the perspective to encompass the media ecosystem. Although they are aware of the professional risk, she claimed that reporters sensed the seriousness of the story. Sources became cold. Editors requested multiple confirmations that could never be documented. Legal departments highlighted worries not about accuracy, but about exposure. She explained how stories gently fade away due to a lack of consent rather than a lack of reality. The public frequently believes that quiet indicates nothing occurred, according to Jaguar. She made the opposing argument. Silence, she explained, generally means too much happened behind closed doors. She asserted that the underlying story was unaffected by the surface-level turmoil on social media, while the main issue remained out of frame because it was never intended to be seen. Fans fought timelines, conjectured motivations, and argued personalities. She framed this confusion as purposeful. If you give folks something smaller to argue about, they won't notice what's being shielded. She said that Drake, Chris Brown, and Kanye West were part of the debate not through public occurrences, but by shared silence. She asserts that it is rarely a coincidence when several influential people steer clear of the same subject. She took care not to apportion blame. Rather, she focused on accountability. Accountability for systems that put continuity ahead of clarity. She spoke about agreements created to protect brands but wind up alienating people. About advice that sounds supportive but ultimately discourages. Truth about how quickly concern changes into management when business is at stake. Jaguar stated that this is why confidence erodes silently, not because people are misled too explicitly, but because they're never told enough to protect themselves emotionally. She recommended that the industry underestimated one thing: memory. Fans recall going missing. Consistencies are remembered by audiences. Press cycles are short-lived compared to patterns. She claims that containment becomes more difficult once people begin making connections. Music, not impossible, but fragile. The following stage wouldn't be explosive, she said. It would be cumulative, unscripted moments that deviate from official narratives, small confirmations, and tiny adjustments in music. Instead of framing this as a threat, she presented it as inevitable. Silence-based systems eventually run afoul of themselves. As she drew toward a conclusion, Jaguar realized the human cost of speaking. She stated that she anticipated criticism, character assaults, and inquiries regarding motivation. She greeted them. She claims that it is simpler to discredit the messenger than to undermine the message. However, she maintained that the tale was not her own. It belonged to the people left puzzled. Silently, the populace moved aside. The people were asked to move on without understanding why. She characterized this moment as a reckoning motivated by wariness rather than wrath. Frustration with watching truth twisted via legal terminology until it no longer resembles reality. The sector could have opted for transparency sooner, she argued. It didn't. Additionally, the price has increased. Instead of issuing a warning, she concluded with a reminder that fame doesn't erase ramifications, that stillness doesn't erase recollection. Impact is not eliminated by such control. Claims that hashtags or headlines won't determine what happens next. Whether or not people continue to accept incomplete truths as whole explanations will determine the outcome. And once that acceptability expires, the system that depended on it begins to weaken. Enough to alter everything that comes after, but not all at once. At this point, the narrative ceases to be entertaining and begins to serve as a warning. Because what you just heard has nothing to do with celebrity, unhealthy relationships, or secret betrayals. It's about what happens when trust is treated like a disposable item and silence is rewarded more than the truth. It has to do with how simple it is to control, reroute, and emotionally reject someone. A faceless system performed precisely what it was intended to do when safeguarding an image takes precedence above safeguarding people. It absorbed the shock. It diverted focus. The harm was isolated. And it moved forward like nothing ever occurred. However, those trapped inside it found it difficult to move on. They were left with unresolved issues, strained relationships, and a reality that could never be explained by a public declaration. This is the kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It lingers. It changes how individuals love, trust, and how they talk and how they remain silent. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. These kinds of stories are so frightening that they don't last. They endure because they're familiar. Because we've witnessed numerous iterations of this, each with a different face, a different headline, and the same conclusion of silence triumphing. And the truth is costly. However, quiet is only effective when people become distracted. The purpose of this story is to make you feel uncomfortable. It wasn't intended to make you feel safe if it caused you to feel angry, perplexed, or emotionally uncomfortable. A part of you is aware that there is more to this than what has been permitted to come to light, which is why you are still here listening. It's not over yet. There is a pause because there are more specifics. There are more relationships. Furthermore, trust never fully recovers once it is damaged at this level. The truth only vanishes when everyone decides to stop. So if you're prepared to continue watching what they don't want discussed, stay right here. Subscribe, remain vigilant, and don't turn away. Don't turn away.